Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Today I invite you into a legend born not from war or glory, but from silence. A silence resting on ancient stone, dark water, and the last fading light before night fully arrives. This is a story from a place where the mountains seem to remember, where the moon feels less like a distant light and more like a watchful presence, and where something hidden waits just beyond the edges of ordinary life. Some stories survive for centuries because they touch something deeply human. The wish to hold on to what is beautiful, the fear of losing what cannot be replaced, the quiet hope that somewhere beyond time, love might remain untouched. This legend carries all of that in a soft and haunting way, drawing you into a world where stillness, longing, and destiny slowly begin to entwine. Before we begin this epic, I have a small request that means a lot to me. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The greatest reward for all the effort I put into creating these epics is your support through subscribing to my channel. If you enjoy my content and want me to continue creating more, your subscription and like truly give me great motivation. Also, don't forget to share your thoughts with me in the comments. Your comments not only encourage me, but also help me understand what kind of epics and stories you would like to see on this channel. Thank you so much in advance for your support. Take a deep breath. Relax your mind and let the rhythm of this ancient legend guide you. Wishing you a peaceful sleep. The epic of Selene and Endymion, the mortal the moon refused to lose, begins now. Rising in the middle of the ancient lands of Chariot, the Latmos mountains did not stand merely like a mass formed of stone and wind. It was as if the hand of time itself had left a giant five-fingered mark upon the earth. Those steep masses, shaped by the patient pressure of schist granite and gneiss, carried a silence that reminded one both of the age of the world and of the smallness of man. Some of the rocks resembled a crouching animal, some a face looking toward the sky, and others mute witnesses. The mountain as a whole was living like a story even before any poet had turned it into an epic. In those times, the still water, now called Lake Bafa, had not yet separated from the sea. The Gulf of Latmos carried the salt of the Aegean all the way to the feet of the mountains, keeping the old agreement between wave and rock alive along the shores of Heraclea, Miletos, and Myus. Above, the rocky slopes with their silver tint met the dark blue of the sea below. Storm, abundance, and loneliness came together on the same horizon. So Latmos waited like an ancient being that kept its sacredness hidden in its own shadow, even before the human hand had fully begun to write. The heart of this waiting beat on Tekelec mountain. It was believed to be the place where sky and earth came closest to each other, and since prehistoric times, the summit had been regarded as the home of the god of air and rain. Even before the order of Olympus had fully settled into the memory of these lands, the native people gathered in these caves and tried through rituals to repair the invisible bond between the thirst of the earth and the generosity of the sky. The figures drawn in red ochre on the stone ceilings of Karaderi Cave did not speak only of hunting or dance. They recorded mankind's desire to speak with the rain. The old weather god depicted with his horned headdress, the lively scenes resembling wedding processions, and the lines evoking sacred union showed that Latmos was not an ordinary mountain, but an ancient memory looking down upon the world from above. Every storm was seen not as destruction, but as renewal, and every howl of the wind was listened to like a divine answer. As the great pines swayed on the peaks, people accepted this not only as the language of nature, but as a sign of the invisible will living within the mountain. It was into such a landscape that the young Endymion arrived from the fertile plains of Elis. He was not merely a handsome shepherd walking at the head of a flock. His roots rested in a noble past, and his soul in a restless search. This young man, descended from the line of Deucalion and the son of Ithlios, king of Elis and Calaika, had left behind the splendor that lay open before him. To him, the insides of palaces seemed too narrow, struggles for the throne too suffocating, and nobility too loud. He had chosen not the life that promised power, but the solitude that would deepen the silence within him. Even though he belonged to a dynasty counted among the founders of Elis, what called to Endymion was not the crowd of men, but the distant breath of the mountain. He sensed that a single night spent under the stars was more real than a hall embroidered with gold. For that reason, he had entrusted his fate not to the safe roads of mortals, but to the uncertain yet honest solitude of ancient mountains. When he arrived at Latmos, he did not have only his flock with him. That long longing whose name he could not fully give, filling the heart of a young man who had left the palace, had come with him as well. When the native people of Chariot first saw this foreign young man, they immediately noticed the nobility he carried. These people, who connected every spring, every hollowed stone, and every sudden wind of the mountains with a sacred meaning, sensed in Endymion too something more than an ordinary mortal. The calm on his face, the strength in his body, and the distance in his eyes made him seem like a figure that had come out of the mountain itself. As he climbed the harsh paths of the Beşparmak mountains with the flock he had brought from Elis, the wildness of the region did not wound him, but purified him. As he passed through narrow passages, he drank from the cold springs flowing beneath the shapeless blocks of gneiss, and when evening came, he raised his flute to his lips and let the sound of his own soul drift into the valleys. That melody was neither only sorrowful nor completely comforting. It carried, rather, the deep lightness a person feels upon finally reaching a place that belongs to him. In time, the natives began to call him Latmian, and they saw every place where he grazed his flock as land left under the watch of the gods. Thus Endymion ceased to be a guest of the mountain and became part of its silent order. On his first evening, when he drove his flock to the fertile plain at the foot of Tekelek mountain, the hard gold of the sun was slowly turning into purple and lead-colored shadows. This was both one of the places where the sky could be watched most openly, and a place that stood on the border of sacredness with its closeness to the altar of the old weather god. After gathering his animals in a safe place, Endymion took out his flute, and as the coolness of evening settled over the mountain, he blew his first long melody. The music mingled with the smell of fresh grass, the sound of water running between the rocks, and the long whisper of the pines. Then he leaned his back against a great block of gneiss, and watching the stars just appearing above, he felt for the first time that he had truly settled. The old identity he had carried from Elis was slowly being left behind within the darkening face of the mountain. These lands did not seem as though they would be only a shelter for him. It was as if they were preparing him for a fate whose name he had not known before. As the night deepened, even the stones of the mountain softened, and the wind carried a faint message that another world was approaching. The shepherds who lit fires on the distant slopes spoke of his arrival as the darkness fell. They thought that this young nobleman from Elis had not come only to graze his flock, but seemed like a sign that would awaken the long sleep of Latmos. When night descended fully upon the mountain, a strange softness arose between the gulf's silver-tinged waters and the hard rocks. Without even waiting for the light of night that had not yet risen, Endymion lifted his head and felt within himself a stirring he could not describe. Until that moment he had sought his fate only in solitude. Now solitude itself seemed to be preparing an unseen answer for him. After setting his flute beside him, he closed his eyes and slowly gave himself to the earth as if sinking into sleep on the threshold of eternity. The cool wind descending from the summit of Tekelek mountain as it passed among the great pines seemed to carry with it the mountain's deep memory as well. That night, as Latmos took the young shepherd into its bosom, it was also making room for its unseen guests. Within the shared silence of rocks, waters, and sky, the first step of the great story was being taken. When Helios's gold-wheeled chariot gathered its last crimson glows on the western horizon and withdrew into the deep waters, the vault of the sky was making its familiar, yet every time magnificent, transfer of rule. As the fiery breath of day pulled back, the last fine lines between purple and orange were also fading, slowly spreading across the dark sky. In that moment of transition, the world lowered its voice, as if holding its breath to await the arrival of its new sovereign. Because after Helios, another power was rising, not with the burning splendor of day, but born from the cool dignity of night. Selene, daughter of Hyperion and Theia, was not merely becoming a light visible in the night. She lived like a presence that changed the meaning of darkness, turning it into calm rather than fear. She was regarded not as the eye watching the earth from above, but as the very eye of night. She covered the floors revealed by day, carrying stones, seas, and human faces into a gentler truth. That night too, before she appeared, everything was preparing for her arrival. Even the stars were taking their places in a way that would show respect to the proud queen of the heavens. Before Selene began her journey, she was purifying herself in the cool and clear waters of Oceanus. This was not merely a habit, but the renewal of a divine body preparing to carry the night. When she emerged from the water, every drop falling from her long hair trembled on the dark surface like a small star. The radiance that settled on her skin showed once again why she carried a splendor apart, even among the immortals. She was laying her thin, luminous cloak upon her shoulders and placing on her head the diadem arranged in a manner fitting for that night's moon, sometimes a full circle, sometimes a slender crescent. This crown stood not merely as an ornament, but like the sign that she carried the rhythm of the sky in her body. Then she was turning toward her silver-wheeled chariot. The vehicle, looking whiter than moonlight, stood ready to be drawn by white-winged steeds. When Selene took the reins in her hands, even silence was entering her command. Unlike the harsh brightness brought by her brother Helios, her path carried coolness, comfort, and a deep inner peace. When she rose into the sky, the soft rustling made by the wheels was becoming the only divine sound of the night. As Selene moved through the clouds, she could see at once all the fragility of the sleeping world below. The deep darkness of the forests, the gentle motion of the seas, the frozen shadows of the temples, and the flickering lights of human settlements could not be hidden from her eye. Even so, this privilege of endless sight also carried with it a deep-rooted loneliness. Helios had already withdrawn. Eos had not yet risen, and though the stars accompanied her, they could not share her burden. Every night, Selene was traveling alone through the desolate corridors of the universe, contenting herself only with watching the joys and sorrows on Earth. The cold of immortality was beginning exactly here, in seeing everything, yet not truly belonging anywhere. For this reason, no matter how compassionate her light appeared, an unnamed absence was living within her heart. To be the Queen of Night sometimes meant wandering alone forever along the same route. Still, Selene's bond with the earth was not remaining a dry act of observation. She was also being felt as a power that left the night's dew upon the soil, supported the silent growth of plants, and invisibly affected the cycles of birth. When her light touched a leaf, a vitality like a bead of water remained there. The seas shone differently beneath her, and the rivers kept their directions under her guidance. The route she followed along the circle of the zodiac was becoming not only a celestial path, but also a measure people looked to in order to understand the months, the seasons, and the rhythm of time. Even so, within all this order, Selene could not find a warm center of her own. Sometimes she was slowing her chariot and searching for her own reflection in the still waters of the Aegean. The silvered surface of the Gulf of Latmos was giving back to her not only her own image, but also the absence within her. No matter how flawless the night appeared, within that flawlessness there remained a loneliness that was not shared. Perhaps for that reason, she was beginning to search for something in the world below that would answer her. That night, the clouds had thinned, and the sky above had remained clearer than usual. As Selene extended her light from the Aegean shores toward the mountains inland, her gaze was catching on the dark silhouette of Latmos with its 5 fingers. The gneiss blocks were turning to silver with her touch, and from a distance the mountain's hard face looked almost alive. But what truly stopped her was not the shape of the stones, but that unexplainable call seeming to rise from within the mountain. She was turning the direction of her chariot a little beyond her usual route and beginning to move lower above Latmos. Below, the great pines were swaying slowly in the darkness, and cold springs were flowing between the rocks like fine lines. There was such a deep stillness over the mountain that this silence seemed less like the calm of an ordinary night than the waiting for something. Selene was not seeing that waiting, but feeling it. Ceasing to be the distant and neutral queen of the sky, she was wanting, for the first time, to draw near to the earth. As if there, something real enough to shake her own eternity was present. At last, when her light fell upon the young body sleeping at the foot of a great gneiss block, Selene's nights were never remaining the same again. Endymion lay in the deep and flawless sleep, his head resting against the stone on the fresh grass. The serenity on his face did not resemble the serenity she had seen in palaces, nor in commanders returning from wars, nor in priests praying among the smoke of sacrifices. This was becoming one of those rare pieces in which the world was not ashamed of itself, in which the human body had not yet been spoiled by fate. Selene was feeling the hands that held the reins tremble slightly. Even to look at a mortal with such attention could strain the boundaries of divine order. But at that moment, the heavenly law was falling behind a curiosity in her heart. Endymion's steady breathing, the ancient silence of the stones around him, and the soft glow moonlight created upon his face were holding Selene so deeply that she would not want to turn back. When dawn approached, she had to leave, but that night she was not leaving only her light behind, she was also leaving the first true weight of her heart upon the dark slopes of Latmos and going away. When the sky opened again the next night, Selene set out this time not only to look, but having decided to descend. She understood that what she had left behind at the end of the previous night had not been a momentary enchantment. The young shepherd she had seen in the darkness of Latmos was opening a rift in her immortal life, which passed in endless motion. Because of this, she did not drive her silver chariot at the usual height of the night, and when she reached above Latmos, she slowed her white stallions. The giant silhouette of Beşparmak was once again whitening in the moonlight as if covered in snow, and the rocks stood not as if they were waiting for a queen watching them from above, but as if they were waiting for a guest drawing near to them. For the first time, Selene knowingly left the boundaries of her own kingdom. This descent meant not only that a being belonging to the sky was drawing near to the earth, but that she was giving up the safe distance of immortality, because the cold dignity she could preserve while looking from afar would not remain the same once she set foot on the ground. And yet she did not stop. She slowly directed the reins downward, and with this decision of hers, the darkness took on a deeper but softer form. As she drew closer to the earth, she began to feel the true texture of the world she had until then touched only with light. The coolness of the atmosphere was colliding with the warmth the ground had stored throughout the day. These worked their way into her body, like two different hands touching two different kinds of skin. As the silver wheels of her chariot glided silently over the tops of towering pines and wild mastic trees, the scent of fresh grass, damp earth, and the cool surface of stone rose from below. The still waters of Bafa reflected the moonlight back, forming trembling rings on their surface as if they wished to witness the goddess's descent. In that moment, Selene understood that she desired more than being a night eye shining in the sky. It was one thing to illuminate the earth, and something entirely different to want to become a part of it. Until now, she had been the light that framed the world below. Tonight, she wanted to step inside that frame. The stones of Latmos, its water and its heavy scent, showed her for the first time what was lacking in her own immortality. Perhaps that was exactly why the fragility of humans seemed so powerful. They lived everything they experienced by truly touching it. When Selene stepped down from her chariot, the soft resistance of the earth surprised her. Feet accustomed to clouds, stars, and the thin night wind met for the first time the silent touch of grass. Endymion lay before her, stretched out on his cloak, with one hand having fallen loosely to his side, his head resting against a rock. In the depth of his sleep, there was an unadorned but flawless security. As Selene drew closer to the young man's face, she understood that the beauty she saw did not come from form alone. What made him unique was that the living strength in his body and the peace in his soul were visible at the same time. Marble statues could also be beautiful, but they did not breathe. And yet Endymion's steady breathing established a small and real rhythm within the night. In that moment, Selene remembered the old legends that said the gods envied the happiness of humans. For on Olympus, no being appeared so vulnerable, so secure and so complete. This calm that Endymion carried while sleeping quietly revealed what was missing in the goddess's eternal but cold existence. When she knelt beside the young shepherd, Selene's hair spread over the grass like silver water. As the diadem on her head shone with the round brightness of the full moon, The light formed small shadows on Endymion's face, deepening his sleeping features even more. For a long time, Selene did nothing but look. That gaze carried as much admiration as desire, and as much astonishment as admiration. Because what stood before her was not merely a handsome mortal, but something that seemed to carry in his body the sleep of the mountain that had lasted thousands of years. It was as if Latmos was giving all its ancient silence to the breath of this young man. Selene carefully extended her hand, first drawing near enough to touch his face, then slowly allowing acceptance to take the place of her hesitation. In that moment, an immortal being's drawing near to the fate of a mortal created an invisible tremor in the order of the sky. Then she bent down and left a very light kiss on his forehead. This touch seemed less like passion than like the first seal pressed upon fate. As the moonlight poured down from the peaks of the mountain, the first true contact of silver and earth was completed silently, yet irreversibly. Then Selene moved a little closer to him and listened to Endymion's heartbeat. That sound resembled neither the cold vibration of the stars nor the steady movement of the seas. Because it was singular, warm, and temporary, it seemed more precious. It was exactly this transience that awakened an unexpected ache within the goddess. Even though immortality seemed to rule over time, sometimes the short life of a single mortal could be lived more intensely than it. Selene let the dewdrops falling from her hands settle on the grasses around Endymion, on the little flowers, and on the soil at the foot of the rock. This was the only gift that could be given to him without waking him. Wherever she touched, a cool blessing remained, and the grass seemed to come alive without waiting for morning. But even the deepest hours of the night did not remain open forever. The goddess, who knew her place within the circle of the zodiac, sensed the first preparation of dawn far off in the east. The arrival of Eos meant not only the birth of a morning, but also the end of this secret closeness. In that moment, Selene learned that separation carried a pain like that of humans even before it was lived. As she returned to her chariot, what she left behind was not only a sleeping young man, but also a part of her former self. Because the Selene who had descended to Latmos before this night, and the Selene who now had to rise again, were not the same being. When she took the silver reins into her hand and glided back toward the sky, the soft sound of the wheels joined with the wind among the pines, turning into a lullaby that protected Endymion's sleep. Below, the nice blocks, the fresh grasses, and the silent body of the young shepherd remained in that brief, fragile darkness before morning. Above, the goddess now carried not only a power that illuminated the earth, but a heart bound to it. When dawn broke, the traces of the night would be erased from the surface of the stones, and the mountain would return to the hard lines of daytime. But the path opened by that first kiss and that first descent would not close. As Latmos buried this secret in its caves, its springs, and its passes where the wind wandered, Selene began to wait for the next night. This story now belonged not only to the sky or to the earth. A fate had begun in which the two had become irreversibly intertwined. The sound rising from Endymion's flute was no longer merely a shepherd's tune filling the emptiness of evening. It was turning into a call left to the stones, the springs, and the night of Latmos. After the first divine contact, the silence inside the young prince was not breaking. On the contrary, It was becoming deeper. Yet this depth carried longing as much as peace. During the day, while he led his flock across the mountain's shaded slopes, his hand still did its work with the same calmness, and his face kept the same dignified serenity. Yet his thoughts remained in the night. He could not tell whether what he had experienced between sleep and wakefulness was a play of dreams or a hidden grace of the gods. This uncertainty did not scatter him. On the contrary, it gave another weight to the sound of his flute. Each note came out a little more sincerely, a little more deeply. It was no longer seeking the loneliness of the mountains, but an unseen face bending over the mountain. The hard gneiss blocks of Latmos sent this new melody back in echoes, and the ancient pines bent gently around that sound, together with the wind. For Endymion, music was no longer a way to pass the time, but the only honest way to reach the unseen. As the days stretched on under the heavy light of the sun, Endymion's soul grew more and more bound to the night. When the midday heat warmed the stones, he led his flock down to the cool spring heads, and while the animals grazed, he withdrew to a shaded place among the rocks and took his flute in hand. Sometimes he likened its sound to the curling flow of water, and sometimes he poured into the notes the loneliness the mountain had carried for thousands of years without speaking. Even the red ochre figures of Caradere Cave seemed to come alive again with these melodies, as if the frozen movement on the rocks breathed for a moment. Sometimes Endymion felt as though he sensed nymphs around him, listening without being seen. And sometimes he regarded this feeling as a delicate illusion created by his own longing. But one thing did not change. Every evening his eyes remained on the western horizon, and as soon as Helios withdrew, he waited for another light to rise into the sky. Day now seemed incomplete to him, and even the sun's golden brightness could not quench the thirst inside him. The cool radiance of the moon, however, lived in him like a promise that comforted him even before it touched him. Selene, moving across the sky, could not remain indifferent to this call rising from below. Though she seemed to follow her usual path as the queen of the night, her reins were no longer guided by duty alone. That troubled and clear sound rising from Endymion's flute awakened an echo in her Titan blood that had until then remained silent. Until that moment, she had watched countless kingdoms, wars, praying hands, and weeping cities, and had looked upon all of them with distant witness. But the music of this young shepherd did something entirely different to her, because in that sound there was no power, no display, only a soul honestly reaching toward something it knew it could never attain. Night after night, Selene drew her chariot a little closer to Latmos, sometimes listening from behind the clouds, sometimes leaning lower from among the stars. Every note rising from below opened a small breach in the cold order of the sky. For Selene, the meaning of the night was no longer only to paint the world in silver. It was to hear the longing settling inside that young man sitting on the silent slopes of Latmos, to understand it, and to sense whether that sound was directed toward her. Thus a wordless exchange was formed between them. As Endymion looked upward and played his flute, Selene deepened her light a little more. As Selene bent down to him from the night, Endymion's melodies grew a little bolder. This silent duet was also seeping into the mountain's own life. When night fell and the moon rose over the still waters of Bafa, it seemed to reflect not only the sky, but also the invisible line between these two beings. Sometimes Endymion felt as powerful as a god, and sometimes he felt as small as a speck of dust, because the thing he wanted to touch with his music was a being that stood beyond the boundaries of the world. As each full moon approached, the color of his notes changed, and the startled sorrow of the first days gave way to a great but timid expectation. Selene too began to live the phases of the moon, almost according to the rhythm of his flute. The celestial order was perhaps not breaking, but her inner balance was changing. The earth she had watched with cold witness for thousands of years now gained meaning around a single sound. The whole vastness of the night narrowed toward the breath of a mortal sitting on a secluded slope of Latmos. As this closeness grew, Endymion also began to read the moonlight differently. In the deepest hours of the night, when he quieted his flute and lifted his head upward, Selene's light no longer seemed to him like mere brightness. Within that radiance, he sensed a hidden attention, an almost audible patience and a waiting directed toward him. As the moonlight moved across his face, it was as if unseen words were being laid upon his forehead and cheeks, and even if he could not fully understand them, he could not reject them. Neither the noble past he had left behind in Elis, nor the daily order of his flock held the center of his soul anymore. The axis of his life was shifting toward that silent majesty descending over the mountain at night. The distance between earth and sky was no longer as rigid as it had once been. The air passing through the holes of the flute softened invisible walls. Endymion could not explain this, yet he felt it with his whole body. For Selene, the situation was no different. The magnificent but arrogant feasts of Olympus grew dim beside the sincerity in the young shepherd's music. Immortality, for the first time, looked as alive as a mortal breath. At last, on a June night when the moon was completely full, and the brightness of the sky had reached an almost harsh clarity, the waiting came to an end. Even the usual wind on the peaks of Latmos fell still, and for a moment the mountain seemed to stand as if holding its own breath. When Endymion released the final melody into the emptiness, the echo did not return as it always had. The air suddenly cooled and filled with a silvery mist. The light in the clearing before him intensified, and then Selene appeared from within that light. She stood without her feet touching the earth, the folds of her white robe blending into the night, and her radiance grew strong enough for a moment to almost blind the young shepherd's gaze. Endymion could not move from where he stood, because the thing he had longed for through the years ceased for the first time to be only an intuition and took form. As Selene stood before him, she too felt that the distance between mortal and immortal had shortened to the length of a single breath. Then she broke the silence with her first words, in a softness that left behind even the sweetest note of the flute. That moment was not only an encounter, but the long-made music of the nights finally turning into speech. After those first words, the world between them changed. After that night, the meetings between Selene and Endymion were no longer merely a distant exchange between light and music, but turned into a regular and secret closeness. Sometimes the moon hung in the sky like a thin balsamic curve, and sometimes, as it moved again toward fullness, it gathered both of them into the same silent promise. Each time, Selene left her chariot in a more secluded corner of the sky and lowered her light to Latmos like a thin silver road. Endymion, meanwhile, did not merely wait for the coming of night. He prepared his body and mind for these brief but burning reunions. When those meetings began, at first Even words fell behind what the two of them carried. Selene's voice carried the coolness that came from deep water. Endymion's reply laid the world before her, scented with stone, grass, and wind. The attraction between them was great and clear, but it moved forward not like a shouting passion, but like a heavy surrender that deepened a little more with every meeting. That is why their conversations became not a confession, but a way of gently entering one another's field of being. She first told him about the order of the sky. She told him of the unfailing paths of the stars, the silent circle of the turning vault of heaven, how the night dew descended onto the earth, and how time was actually woven from the patient turning between light and darkness. But she told these things not with the manner of a goddess giving instruction, but like a lonely being who wanted to share her burden. Because ruling the sky meant seeing everything, yet not truly being able to hold anything. As Endymion listened to her, he faced eternity for the first time without fear. In return, he spoke of why a moment on earth was so precious. He described the cool sting left in the throat by water drunk from a spring, the peace that came from leaning against a rock warmed by the sun, the scent of resin seeping from the mastic tree and clinging to the fingers, and why the earth was breathed in more deeply after rain. As Selene listened to his words, she understood that mortality was not only weakness, but the ability to feel life intensely. And Endymion, for the first time, sensed that the loneliness carried by a goddess was far heavier than her brightness. Their meetings continued each time at a different point on Latmos, but the mountain itself always remained between them like a third witness. Some nights they stood at the foothills of Epilogue mountain, and some nights they went as far as the depths of Chariot cave. When Endymion took her beneath the red figures drawn on the cave ceiling thousands of years earlier, Selene remained silent for a long time. Those marks left on the rock by human hands seemed to her more sincere than the sacrifices offered in temples. Endymion made her feel that those drawings were not merely decoration. They were the memory of the first bond humanity had formed with rain, nature, and fear. In that moment, Selene came to understand more deeply that humans approached the gods not only with fear, but also with a search for meaning. For this reason, their conversations did not remain only the whispers of two lovers, but became a sharing that questioned the ancient divide between earth and sky. Yet this deepening carried danger in equal measure, because every new meeting pushed a little further against the invisible boundaries set by Olympus. The shadow of danger grew especially during the hours of parting. Every movement of the night led in the end to a narrow gate that would close with dawn. No matter how much Selene wanted to stay, the first pinkness of Eos coming from the east drew that thin curtain again each time. Endymion no longer experienced this merely as a departure. With Selene's leaving, he felt that a warmth, an intensity, was missing from over the mountain. For Selene, too, these partings were not simply a return to her duty. Each time she looked a little longer at Endymion's face, his hands and his passing youth, she became unwillingly more attached to the sense of time hidden in a mortal's flesh. The romantic tension sharpened precisely here. What drew them to one another was not merely admiration or desire. The inevitability of separation made their closeness both more precious and more dangerous. When Selene's silver fingers moved through Endymion's hair, that touch became a sign not only of love, but also of the prohibition. The light showed them to one another, but that same light also brought with it the fate that forced them to remain hidden. One night, as they looked at the still waters of Bafa, Selene said why she loved the reflection in the lake. There she felt that she saw not only her own image, but the only threshold within the night that did not vanish. As she adjusted her hair before beginning her journeys, she admitted that, in truth, she was most often searching for Endymion's presence in that mirror. Endymion, meanwhile, described how the laurel and myrtle trees by the lakeshore seemed, under the moonlight, as if they belonged to another realm, and said that the silver road falling onto the water reminded him of letters coming from a distant place. These small confessions strengthened the bond between them more than grand words did, because both of them were opening to the other not their realm of power, but their most fragile side. Selene was sharing the lack within immortality, and Endymion the timid joy within mortal life. The rocks of Latmos, the lake, and the night wind carried these whispers. The mountains silently recorded that thin line where two worlds touched one another but could not fully unite. Secrecy was no longer only a condition that had to be protected, but became the very form of their love. And yet, as time passed, this secret closeness gave rise to a heavier sense of fate. Every night Selene stayed beside Endymion. She wished it would never end. She gave herself over to impossible wishes, such as Helios never returning from the depths, the morning being delayed and the stars remaining in place for longer. Endymion too, when her light withdrew, tried to preserve in his body the coolness that remained until the next night. But it was precisely this repetition that made their truth more visible. This love could live only under the cover of darkness, and with dawn it remembered its fragility again. For a goddess to come this close to a mortal was disturbing not only the order, but also Selene's own inner balance. Even so, she did not want to stop it. Endymion's presence became the first thing to fill the great emptiness within eternity. In the end, the night closed again. Selene rose. Endymion remained below. But this time, beneath the separation, another shadow was born. As the power of love grew, how breakable it was also began to become increasingly clear. That shadow had taken shape one morning before Selene's eyes. Dawn had not yet fully broken, and the first pinkness of Eos had touched only the edge of the eastern horizon like a thin trace. As usual, Selene had been preparing to leave, and before departing, she had bent down to look at Endymion one last time. What she saw in that moment was so small that another eye might not have noticed it. A single white strand among the young shepherd's dark hair. But for the goddess, this tiny sign had been as heavy as an omen that shook the sky. Because that strand of hair was not merely news of age, it was clear proof that time had begun to work itself upon the body she loved. When Selene had intensified her light a little more on Endymion's face, she had also noticed things she had previously managed to ignore. In the flawless appearance of his skin, there was a faint weariness, and in the rhythm of his breathing, there was a fragility too fine to be noticed. For the first time, immortality had appeared to her not as a privilege, but as a cold privilege that would take away what she loved. As dawn grew, an indescribable fear had filled Selene. As she rose into the sky, that fear had turned into thought, and thought had soon reached a merciless understanding. No matter how powerful Endymion's beauty was, it was bound to the law of nature. He was not like the unmoving, nice blocks of Latmos. Like every living thing that the earth gave birth to, and in the end called back, he was temporary. Selene had understood that the nights that felt as brief as a blink to her were piling up real losses for Endymion. Every reunion was at the same time an invisible piece taken from his life. One day that face would sink, that strong body would bend, the young clarity in his voice would grow heavy, and in the end, death would quietly take everything back. As the goddess thought of this, for the first time she had been afraid not only of losing, but of being forced to watch it little by little. Because aging was the long farewell that came before death. For a goddess, death might have been a distant event, but the slow fading of a mortal, his diminishing a little more each night, had seemed more cruel than that. This was what had pierced Selene. The thought that she might be forced to see the end of the man she loved, not in a single day, but night after night. This realization had also changed the way she looked at immortality. Until that day, she had lived her own youth as if it were a natural condition and had never questioned that time would not touch her. Now, that same unchanging state stood beside Endymion's mortality like a terrible inequality. Selene had understood much more deeply that humans borrowed life only temporarily, and that nature quietly gathered it back when the day came. That single white strand on Endymion's head was like the first frost of a winter that had only just begun. If no remedy could be found, that whiteness would increase a little more each night. Then lines would fall onto his face, the living strength in his body would grow heavy, and in the end the man she loved would be drawn into the dark stillness of the earth. The goddess had not been able to accept this. Even the idea of death had wounded her, but what was truly unbearable was to keep watching that unraveling without end. In the cold palaces of Olympus, no feeling had ever been this burning. Now, for the first time, she was trying to protect not the divine order itself, but the one she loved. And that desire to protect did not only grieve her, it was forcing her to act. As she circled over Latmos one last time, a way out had flashed into her mind. If death could be likened to sleep, then perhaps the way to escape the hand of old age was to suspend awakening. Instead of surrendering Endymion to death, perhaps it was possible to take him into a sleep that did not decay. At first, this thought had swayed between mercy and horror, because was eternal sleep a way of saving life or of giving it up in another form? But in Selene's eyes, the choices had narrowed very quickly. Either Endymion would age, collapse, and eventually die, or he would be stopped somewhere before time's teeth could work themselves into his body. The goddess had not ignored how frightening this idea was, but she had understood that love often carried not only tenderness, but also harsh decisions born of helplessness. Even for a being raised in the cold of immortality, this thought was heavy. And yet, for the first time, she had seriously begun to think of going beyond divine laws. The desire not to lose Endymion had begun to grow greater than her duty to light the nights. Thus the decision had taken shape not so much as a slow thought, but as a necessity growing inwardly. Selene could no longer simply wait. The ancient cults of the mountain, the old traces of the god of air and rain, the dew that fell upon the earth, and the patient motion of the stars would not be enough for her on their own. The power that could undo the knot of fate lay in the highest will of Olympus. When she thought of Zeus's name, it meant not merely making an appeal, but turning toward the very heart of divine order itself, because for a goddess to go this far for a mortal was becoming a matter that concerned the balance of the sky. Even so, Selene had not withdrawn. Endymion's face, that single white sign in his hair, and the fragile stillness resting over him as morning approached, had left no room for hesitation. When she left Latmos that morning, she was no longer the same Selene. Though she continued to be the queen of the night, she no longer carried only light within her. The urgent resolve of a heart that had seen the man it loved would be defeated by time was also rising with her. As dawn grew, Selene had turned the reins not westward but higher. As the white stallions of her chariot cut through the thin layers of ether, behind her the silver mirror of Bafa, the hard rocks of Latmos, and Endymion sleeping below had begun to grow small. But only the landscape had grown small. The pain she carried had not. On the contrary, it had sharpened as she rose, because now she knew what she had to do. She would stand before Zeus and ask for a favor, so that the mortality of the man she loved would not be left to the ordinary flow of fate. Whether that favor would be salvation or a gift with a heavy price, there was no turning back now. For the first time, Selene had left behind the dignity of her immortality, her divine distance, and the cold balance woven from duty. Below, Endymion was still sleeping, but in the goddess's eyes, that sleep was no longer only the night's final rest. It was the threshold of the great decision that was approaching, the great loss and perhaps an irreversible salvation. As Selene rose toward Olympus, she had accepted that love had transformed her from a goddess who brought light into a being ready to bargain with fate. As the last lights of her silver chariot thinned and disappeared into the clear emptiness of the ether, Selene reached the threshold of Olympus. After the wild and windy slopes of Latmos, this place carried a different order of existence. Every column was flawless, every surface was measured, every silence was woven with authority. Ivory columns bore friezes carved with the stories of stars and constellations, and the gleaming stone floors seemed to allow no fragility other than the footsteps of the gods. As Selene passed through these palaces, with every step she felt that she was walking between two different worlds. The young man she had left in the soil of Latmos still carried the fragile warmth of mortality within his sleep. Here everything was unshakable, cold and eternal. The splendor of Olympus might once have filled her with pride. Now that same splendor weighed heavily on her heart, which had tightened because of the single white strand in Endymion's hair. Even though she tried to maintain the dignity of the queen of the night that she once carried, she was no longer coming among the gods to declare her duty, but to plead for the fate of a mortal she loved. Zeus, on his mighty throne standing at the center of the sky, looked not only like a ruler, but as if he were the order itself. The scepter in his hand bore storm and judgment, and his gaze stood beyond that of a god, almost as cold and certain as law itself. When Selene came before him, the great silence of Olympus grew even more rigid, because this was no longer an ordinary plea. It was a goddess asking for intervention in the flow of order for the sake of a mortal. Selene explained who Endymion was not only through his lineage, but through his soul. She said that he came from the noble house of Elis, but had renounced the noise of the palace and chosen the silence of the mountains, that he had approached the earth, the air, and the night with a heart more open than other people. While praising Endymion's beauty, she did not limit it only to form, but made it felt that this beauty was born from the pure bond he had formed with nature. For this reason, She argued that for such a being to be worn down by the rusty teeth of time and mixed back into the soil would not be only a personal loss, but the breaking of a subtle harmony within creation. The great ones of Olympus did not listen to this defense with the same eyes. In Hera's gaze, there was the old cold objection felt toward every love that blurred the boundaries of the gods. Perhaps she did not belittle the feeling inside Selene, but she found it dangerous that Selene would try to place it above divine order. Pan, however, carried a more open mockery. The wild god, who remembered the old passions he had lived through in the cool forests of Arcadia, believed that this great devotion was not lasting, but a passing passion as fleeting as moonlight. To him, nature called the body, not the soul. For a goddess to place eternal meaning upon a shepherd was as empty as giving a stone's name to the wind. But Selene received this mockery not as if she had not heard it, but as if she had heard it and counted it as having lost its worth. Because what she defended now was not only love, but the fate that Endymion's existence deserved. The goddess's voice softened, but it did not withdraw. She made it clear that she did not want the man she loved to be erased from the world, that she could not bear to watch time slowly undo him, and that to remain silent before that would be to deny her own light. Zeus did not listen to Selene's words merely as the overflowing plea of a lover. He had to weigh the result this request would produce within the whole of order. If he directly granted immortality to a mortal, he knew that this would set a precedent and weaken the seriousness of divine order. But there was also a cost to rejecting the request completely. Selene's light did not only illuminate the night, but also traced a line of compassion within the delicate balance of the universe. To break her heart would perhaps mean damaging a balance within the sky itself. For this reason, Zeus thought that justice did not always descend in the form of punishment or grace, and that sometimes the heaviest fairness was to return the choice to the one it concerned. If Selene's love was great, Endymion's will should not be taken lightly either. This matter could not be closed as a one-sided judgment that the gods would give about a mortal. Fate here could become real only if it was confirmed by the mouth of the one who would live it. When the decision was announced, it seemed as though even the stars worked into the ceilings of Olympus trembled slightly. Zeus neither accepted Selene's request as it was, nor rejected it cruelly. Instead, he declared that Endymion himself had to choose the price of the miracle. Two paths would be placed before the young prince. In one, he would return to Elis, take up his kingship, and be honored by his people. But like all humans, he would grow old and decline, and in the end, become the portion of the earth. In the other, he would enter a form of existence beneath Selene's light in which time did not work, and his youth would not be broken. But the price of this would be to give up the world, waking life and every bond formed with the daytime language of the human mind. This second path carried absence as much as immortality. Zeus placed not the beauty of the decision, but its weight to the forefront. Because the true test lay not in receiving grace, but in understanding at the cost of which loss it would be accepted. When Selene heard this judgment, victory and fear filled her at the same time. Death was no longer an inevitable and blind end. At least it had turned into a possibility that could be considered and chosen. But no one knew better than she did how harsh what had been placed before Endymion truly was, because she also knew the part of the man she loved that was bound to the earth, his inclination toward the scent of daytime and the small pleasures of living. As she withdrew through the corridors of Olympus, she carried in her heart an anxiety as deep as her hope. She trusted the depth within Endymion's own soul, but she could not know in advance to which end that depth would lead him. As dawn illuminated the earth, Selene was no longer the same Selene. The being who left Olympus that morning was not only a goddess who illuminated the nights, she was the bearer of a love forced to hear the decision of fate from the mouth of the mortal she loved. Latmos waited silently below, and the mountain's hard body remained quiet, as if it sensed that the gods would soon descend there. That evening, the weather on the peaks of Tekelec mountain departed from its usual order. Before the sky had fully darkened, heavy clouds gathered all along the horizon. The direction of the wind hardened, and an invisible tension seemed to spread across the surface of the rocks. The summit that the ancient peoples of Latmos had dedicated to the god of weather and rain was this time filled not only with faith, but with the weight of divine presence itself. When the first lightning flashed, the mountain became visible for a moment with all its bones. The blocks of gneiss and schist shone with a cold, raw light. Endymion did not meet this as if it were an ordinary storm. Nature had long been speaking to him through signs, and he sensed that this night was arriving in a different way. After leading his flock down to the safer clearings below, he walked upward alone. The moon was still behind the clouds, but deep within the night he could still feel Selene's presence. Yet tonight it was not first the light of the one he loved that was calling him, but a greater power. When he reached the summit, even that ancient silence of Latmos had ceased to feel familiar, giving way to a tense waiting that yielded to the approach of judgment. The descent of Zeus was experienced not as the arrival of a body coming down from the sky to the earth, but as the brief disappearance of boundaries. The clouds parted, the air darkened, and the Father of the gods appeared in the opening at the center of the storm. The scepter in his hand stood not only as a sign of sovereignty, but like the material form of judgment itself. Endymion did not freeze with fear before him, yet he felt with his whole body the greatness of the thing standing before him. Zeus spoke to the young shepherd without trying to appear merciful, for what he was about to offer was neither a simple favor nor a bare punishment. First, he placed before him the ordinary yet honorable path of life. He could return to Elis, take his kingdom, govern his people with honesty, and let his name live on in the land, in contests and in memory. This path was finite, but it was not incomplete. It was a choice that did not belittle the greatness of being human. Glory, duty, inheritance, the names of brothers, the line of the father, the responsibility of the land, and the heavy yet natural course of aging were waiting for Endymion on this path. Then he opened the second path, and the whole coolness of the night seemed to be felt more deeply at that moment. If Endymion wished it, time would withdraw its hand from him, his body would not surrender to old age, and he would be preserved in eternal youth beneath Selene's light. But this would not be living in the ordinary sense, for the price of remaining in the world was a waking mind. Yet this path required giving up the noise of the world, the demands of the days, and the constant obligation of human consciousness to respond. Zeus offered this option like a gift, but he did not adorn it or soften it. If Endymion chose this path, he would lie down in eternal sleep in the most secluded cave of Latmos. He would remain close enough to feel Selene's touches, but he would not be able to answer that touch with an awake mind. He would preserve his youth, but he would withdraw from the daylight language of life. Thus the miracle offered by the god carried both a salvation and an absence at the same time. The harshness of the decision lay precisely within this duality. When Endymion was left between the two paths, his mind filled not only with fear but also with memories. He thought of the wide plains of Elis, his father's name, the sense of order and responsibility he had felt in childhood, the spirit of competition shared with his brothers, and the invisible weight of the crown he was expected to bear one day. Within that life there was not only burden, but meaning as well. If he returned to his people, he would not live as an ordinary mortal, but as a true ruler, for better or worse. He would feel the morning sun on his face, govern the abundance of the land, and try to answer his people's expectation of justice. But amid all these thoughts, the face of Selene leaning over him at night also appeared in perfect clarity. He did not forget the coolness the silver light left on his skin, the moments when a shepherd's pipe note touched the sky, the path that opened on Bafa's still water through her light, and the wordless closeness they had built together. The path of kingship meant gaining the world and losing her. Eternal sleep, meanwhile, meant preserving her and withdrawing from the rest of the world. That was why the choice before him was not only between two fates, but like being caught between two different understandings of truth. As the silence on the mountain stretched on, the scale within Endymion was slowly settling into place. He did not look down on the earth. On the contrary, he loved it with all its warmth. He truly loved the smell of pine needles, the cool mist the earth released after rain, the wind passing through his flock, the weariness of the day, and the first shadows of evening. But he also could not deny that what he had lived with Selene reached deeper than all the other joys in this world. For him, the issue was not only being reunited with his beloved. Besides Selene, he had felt that he himself was also being transformed into a deeper and truer being. Even so, it would not be right to say that the idea of immortal sleep did not frighten him. In this choice there was the giving up of himself, or at least a withdrawal from the self he was used to. Under Zeus's gaze, he felt the weight of this to the very end. For a human being's freely choosing his fate often meant not ease but an unbearable clarity. Both paths demanded a loss, and Endymion was now beginning to understand which loss felt closer to his own soul. By the end of the night, the great trial had begun to demand an open answer. Zeus did not pressure him to hurry, yet he made him feel that silence, too, could not last forever. Endymion lifted his head and looked at the darkness of the mountain, then at the moon waiting behind the clouds. At that moment he understood that the decision before him was not only about the length of life. To live long or short as a human being was one thing. To choose in what form of being he would stand before the light he loved was something else entirely. If he returned to Elis, he would give himself completely to the world and carry Selene as a loss. If he chose sleep, he would leave the world, but take his love out of time. The essence of the great trial lay here. Zeus had not given him his fate. He had extended back to him the responsibility of fate. Endymion was no longer only a shepherd or a prince. He was becoming the one who would determine what human will could dare in the face of divine grace. The decision had not yet passed his lips, but his soul had already drawn near to the irreversible threshold. The decision did not take long, because some choices were not made through long thought, but had already been given silently in the deepest place within a person. When Endymion turned his head toward Zeus, there was neither overflowing excitement nor crushing fear on his face. More than anything, he carried a clarity that had left the storm inside him behind. He knew that if he returned to Elis, he could be a good king. He could fulfill what his land, his people, and his name required. But he now saw fully that this would not only make him grow old, but also separate him from Selene. The world was real to him, but the bond he had formed with Selene was no less real. Perhaps it even carried a truth greater than the ordinary measures of human life. For this reason, he made his choice not as an escape, but as a form of loyalty. Before Zeus, he declared that he wanted endless sleep. As he said this, he made it felt that he was not acting this way because he feared old age, pain, or death, but because he wanted to remove the corroding power of time from over his love. At that moment, the silence on the peaks of Latmos changed. It deepened as if the mountain's sleep of thousands of years had finally found its own human being. Zeus saw in the young prince's decision not a temporary excitement, but an unshakable will. He did not soften this choice, he made him consider its price once more. Endless sleep, no matter how peaceful its name sounded, meant withdrawing from the world. Endymion would no longer be someone who walked under the sun, spoke with people, made decisions, and lived his joy and sorrow in the language of the day. He would remain close to Selene, but this closeness would not take the form of an awake togetherness. Even so, Zeus respected this will, because the young man's choice was born not from a simple desire, but from the courage to surrender his own being to a greater harmony. For that brief moment, a distant tenderness appeared in the gaze of the father of the gods. Endymion was no longer only the son of Elis, nor only the shepherd of Latmos. He had turned into a figure standing at the threshold where a human being could approach immortality not without a price, but by bargaining with his own consciousness. With his choice, he changed not so much the length of his life as the shape of his destiny. After this, Endymion walked the paths of Latmos one last time with an awake mind. While Zeus's judgment waited above the sky, he looked into the mountain without hurrying. Everything was as clear as if it were being seen for the first time. The long trunks of the pines, the wind-worn surface of the rocks, the grass growing from the bases of the rocks, the cool sound of the springs, and the calm movement of the animals wandering on the distant slopes. As the memory of Elis was now drawing back, Latmos had become a deeper and more inward homeland. Within this homeland, Endymion searched for a shelter that Selene could easily reach every night, but that would remain far from the noise of the world. Because he did not want endless sleep to begin in a random place, the cave he would choose would not be only the hollow where he would lay down his body, but the threshold itself to which he would entrust his destiny. And the mountain seemed to answer him. The wind grew lighter, the birds fell silent, and the spaces between the rocks opened with silence. Nature was not sending him away so much as inviting him into its own depth. As he walked, pieces of his past returned one by one. His father's name, the expectation of his lineage, the possibility of kingship, the still unspoiled strength of his youth, the sound of his flute, and all the paths by which he could mix among people appeared before him for a short time. But at the end of every memory, Selene's light appeared. The silver path stretching along the shore of Bafa, the coolness falling on his face in the night, the silent gaze bending over the mountain, and the fine but certain feeling of a closeness difficult to find in the world cast every earthly memory into shadow. At that moment, Endymion understood that his choice meant not only giving up kingship, but also giving up the form his awake self had grown used to. Even so, he did not experience this as destruction, because what would be taken from him was not all of life, but only its expression limited to the day. What would be preserved in Selene's light was his truest aspect, namely the inner core reaching toward the one he loved. For this reason, the desire for endless sleep began to carry within him as much surrender as absence, and as much strange peace as surrender. When he finally found the cave, it was felt that this was not a coincidence. Hidden among the rocks, this deep hollow silenced the noise of the outer world at the entrance and let inside only coolness, dampness, and a chosen portion of moonlight. When Endymion entered, even the density of the air changed, as if the cave wrapped itself around him like a sleep that had been waiting for him. The stone surface where he would lie was neither too hard nor comforting. Rather, it was like a threshold ready to separate a person from the world. As Endymion chose this place, he did not think only of his own peace. He felt that Selene could lower her light here every night, wash him with her silver, and that the rest of Latmos would protect this secret. In this way, the place where he would sleep was determined, and destiny was no longer an abstract concept. Deep in the cave, he looked around one last time like an awake human being. The silence among the rocks stood not so much like a farewell as like the first sentence of another form of existence. As the night grew heavier outside, even the mountain itself gained, with this choice, a meaning that was older, more sacred, and more closed. When he looked out of the cave one last time, the moon became visible again in the sky. Selene had not touched him yet. She only waited silently above, because what came after this was too great to be rushed. Standing at the threshold of the cave, Endymion understood that he had reached the final line of awake life. Every step he would take after this would be toward a peace from which there was no return. To approach willingly that state counted as neither full death nor full life was the heaviest example of how a human being could surrender to something greater than himself. Even so, there was not regret within him, only a calm heaviness, because he had understood that in order not to lose what he loved, he could not hold on to the world completely. After this moment, the caves of Latmos would no longer remain ordinary hollows in stone, but would turn into the place of an eternal secret hidden under Selene's light. Endymion was ready to cross the threshold. As the coolness of the night surrounded him, the daytime voice of human life quietly remained behind, and inside the cave, sleep began to wait for him without naming itself. When Endymion crossed the threshold of the cave, all the sounds of the outside world gradually closed behind him. This closing did not come like a sudden deaf darkness, but was felt like a deep withdrawal that gently separated a person from his former life. The inside of the mountain was cool. The gneiss and schist walls had long since forgotten even the last warmth of the day and held only dampness, the smell of stone, and an ancient silence. Endymion immediately felt that time would not flow here as quickly as it did in the world above. The cave looked less like an ordinary shelter and more like the material form of the fate he had chosen by his own will. Outside remained his flock Elis, his father's name, the roads to be walked under the sun, and all the daytime burdens of human life. Inside, there was only the decision itself. For that reason, every step he took deeper into the cave meant less moving among stones than crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Even so, there was no haste in him, but a strange calm, because the greatest noise of a life whose decision had already been made had gone silent, leaving in its place a heavy clarity waiting for its outcome. When he reached a deeper part of the cave, he saw moonlight slipping in through a narrow opening and falling onto a certain stone surface. It was as if the mountain had hidden there a bed that had already been chosen for him. Endymion remained standing for a while and looked around him one last time like a person still awake. The shadows on the walls were motionless. Even the drops of moisture leaking from the ceiling seemed to have lowered their voices as much as possible. Then he set his flute beside him. The movement was small, but the meaning inside it was great, because that instrument, which had carried his voice into the nights, was now becoming a piece of the past, left beside silence. He adjusted his cloak, leaned his back against the coolness of the stone, and for a moment closed his eyes before lying down. He thought at once of walking under the sun, the scent of the pines, the taste of the springs, and Selene's face. No regret rose inside him. Instead, the heavy peace of a destiny completed by his own will settled within him. He knew that he was about to break away from the world, but he accepted this not because the world was worthless, but because he found another truth more indispensable than it. When he lay down, the contact his body made with the stone carried certainty more than hardness. As Endymion slowed his breathing, the silence inside the cave adjusted itself to his rhythm. The wind outside sometimes moved among the rocks, but reached the inside only as a faint whisper. The eternal sleep he had chosen before Zeus had seemed until that moment like an idea, a price, a concept. Now, for the first time, it was becoming a real state settling into the body. When Endymion closed his eyes, the thoughts moving around waking consciousness at first remained scattered, then slowly grew sparse. The image of Elise faded, the possibility of kingship grew distant, and all the concrete calls of daylight withdrew. In return, Selene's light became clearer. He felt her not as a face, but as the coolness she left on his skin, the patience bending over the night, and a closeness that came before words. Sleep was no longer a rest that came on its own, as it did on ordinary nights. It descended more like a divine covering that slowly closed the human mind and touched the deepest place of the soul. As Endymion entered beneath that covering, he silently accepted what would be taken from him and what would be preserved. At those same hours, Selene, rising in the sky, felt with her whole being that this night was different from all other nights. As she moved above Latmos, she directed her light not to the mountain's summit, but to a single point. Because she no longer had to search for her beloved, she knew where he lay and on what threshold. The white stallions of her chariot grew heavier in the fine layers of the ether, and the soft sound of the wheels remained like the only steady pulse within the night. When Selene approached the mouth of the cave, she understood that the silence coming from inside was not ordinary. This was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a fate that had been chosen and was being protected. When she entered, she saw Endymion lying peacefully on the stone. His face was still young, His features were unchanged, and his breath was moving back and forth at the edge of a deep dream. As Selene looked at him, she understood that the man she loved was no longer waiting for her, but had entered an irreversible surrender. Within this sight, there was both victory and sorrow, because she had succeeded in protecting him from time, but she was doing this by drawing him away from the world of day. The goddess knelt at Endymion's head and moved her silver hands for a short time between his eyes and his forehead. This touch was not meant to wake him, but to seal the line between sleep and eternity. As her light intensified on the walls of the cave, the color of the stones changed. The dark gray surfaces took on a silvery pallor, as if the cave itself too was being sanctified by Selene's presence. Endymion's breathing was now calmer, deeper, and came more from within. At that moment, sleep ceased to be an ordinary need of the human body and became part of another order. Selene did not call to him, did not say his name out loud. There was no need for that. The bond between them now contained more than words could carry. The goddess only remained by his head for a long time, looked at her beloved's young face as if memorizing it, and felt that time would no longer be able to enter this cave as it once had. In the depths of Latmos, an eternity chosen by a mortal's own will was being made permanent by the goddess's light. Outside, the night kept flowing, but here, change for the first time had completely stopped. As dawn approached, Selene did not leave the cave, because separation this time no longer carried its old meaning. Endymion was no longer someone who would be taken from her by morning. At the end of the night, the only thing that would give way to day was the direction of the light. Her beloved, however, would remain in the heart of the mountain, on that eternal boundary bathed by the touch of the moon. When Selene looked out from the mouth of the cave, the hard peaks of Latmos still rose toward the sky as always, but now the whole mountain carried another meaning. It was now not only the place of their meetings, but the silent sanctuary of the price love had paid to overcome time. The steady breathing inside the cave was turning for her into the deepest music of the night. Endymion was neither fully in death nor in his former wakefulness. He stood between the two, in that hidden rank that only moonlight could reach. Thus, Latmos hid within its depths this great sacrifice chosen by human will, and from that night on, with each return, Selene began to descend not only to her beloved, but also to the eternal silence built for his sake. Time was not flowing inside the cave the way it flowed for mortals. Selene's descending to the same stone threshold every night, standing over Endymion with the same patience, and filling the cave walls with the same silver pallor, were creating a separate cycle there. This cycle did not resemble the ordinary passing of days or seasons. It was unfolding more like love, creating its own rhythm. Endymion was not waking, but he was not disappearing either. Each time Selene came, she found unspoiled youth on his face, untouched peace in his closed eyes, and in his breath a pattern carried outside of time. During these long vigils, the cave was not remaining only a place of rest. The light was sinking deeper into the stones. The silence was becoming fruitful rather than heavy, and an unseen formation was growing in the same place from night to night. The great transformation was also beginning here. Selene and Endymion's endless love was ceasing to be a secret bond that remained between two people, and was turning toward giving birth to a new lineage, a new order that would merge with the rhythm of the universe. The cave was no longer only a protected sleep, but was becoming a place of beginning, where sky and earth came together. This beginning was not opening with a loud or showy birth. The arrival of the Menai was as silent as the crack of dawn and as soft as moonlight. While Selene waited at her lover's side, the light in the dimness of the cave was beginning to grow dense at one point. Then that single concentration seemed to divide, multiply, and spread around in separate vibrations. The first forms that appeared were as light as children and as distinct as light itself. Each carried traces of their mother's silver brightness and also took a share from their father's peace. On their faces, Endymion's quiet dignity could be read as much as Selene's cool splendor. These were not merely the continuation of a line like ordinary children of goddesses. They were becoming celestial beings, carrying time's own measure in their bodies. The fact that the Menai were 50 was not accidental either. In some lines of ancient tradition, they were regarded as the personified forms of the 50 lunar months corresponding to the 4-year Olympiad cycle. For that reason, their birth was connected not only to motherhood and lineage, but also to the cosmic order of the moon and the calendar. Thus, the love of Selene and Endymion was beginning to turn into a rhythm written into the calendar. As the Menai multiplied inside the cave, a lightness that had not been there before was moving through the stones of Latmos. Each was carrying a different tone of light. One resembled the silent withdrawal of the new moon, another the growing feeling of hope in the first quarter, another the open and proud brightness of the full moon, and another carried in her body the sorrowful maturity of the moment when the moon began to wane. As Selene looked at them, she saw that her lover's eternal sleep was not going to emptiness. Endymion was not speaking, walking or waking, yet his presence was becoming the source of an order that would spread into the world in 50 separate lunar breaths. For that reason, a different kind of consolation was being born inside the goddess for the first time. She was no longer only protecting the man she loved. Together with him, she was also carrying a new line that would give shape to time itself. As the Menai danced inside the cave, silver reflections resembling the phases of the moon were forming on the gneiss and schist surfaces. The silence was ceasing to be frightening. It was turning into a steady, fertile, and almost ceremonial rhythm. Latmos was going a little beyond being the mountain that hid love, and was becoming the first home from which that love would spread into the sky. The function of these daughters was not only to accompany their mother. They were appearing like living signs, representing the way the months joined one another, the gentle turning of the seasons, and the time human beings tried to establish by looking at the sky. As Selene watched them, she was understanding once again that the darkness of night was no longer only a covering, but also a measure. People were counting the day by the sun and the year by the fertility of the earth, but the months mostly by the changes in her face. The Menai were being thought of as the old counting made flesh. Each was becoming a breath, a month, a small but indispensable part of an age, taking its turn in service. Thus, the endless sleep Endymion had chosen was ceasing to be only an individual fate. His young and unspoiled body was becoming the silent center of the cycles that would move across the sky. The existence of the Menai was also strengthening the great idea. Sometimes love was not only binding two beings to one another, but also arranging time itself in another form. When Selene saw this, for the first time, she also felt a clear pride beneath the sorrow she carried, because even if her lover was sleeping, his fate was multiplying in the darkness. After a while, the Menai were no longer fitting within the boundaries of the cave, but this overflowing did not mean scattering. Selene was beginning to send them one by one upward into the corridors of the night. Each was gliding toward the sky through the gaps in the five-fingered silhouette of Latmos, and was taking her place while carrying her own share of the moon. This scene of ascent was soundless, but its greatness could be read from its silence. People looking at the sky at the mountain's foothills, on the coasts, in the harbors, or by shepherds' fires would experience this not as knowledge of a calendar, but as a consolation that order had not been lost in the darkness. As the moon changed in each of its cycles, Selene and Endymion's endless love would now also have a share behind that change. The Menai were not stars, but they were becoming as guiding as stars. Like light divided yet not deprived of its wholeness, they were dispersing into the night while still carrying a unity that came from the same mother. For Selene, this sending off contained mourning as much as motherhood, because each daughter she sent was carrying a part of the secret they had protected together in the cave up into the sky. Each time a full lunar cycle ended and a new Menai began carrying her own month, the proud peaks of Latmos were turning silver again. The mountain's silence sometimes sounded as if it carried an echo recalling Endymion's old reed flute, as if, even though he could no longer wake, a deep melody of his spirit was accompanying his daughter's passage across the sky. In this way, time was moving a little farther from being a blind flow to be feared. It was turning into something that could be measured, that turned and that returned again. The Menai were leaving behind not only a mythological lineage, they were turning the bond human beings formed with nature, with the moon, and with the feeling of transience into a calendar written into the sky. From night to night, Selene continued returning to her lover's side. But now, each time she returned, she was seeing not only the silence inside the cave, but also the 50-part inheritance moving across the sky. The sleep Endymion had chosen had withdrawn him from the world, but that same decision was making his name travel again through the months. And in the middle of all this, Latmos continued to remain as the speechless witness that kept both sleep, birth, and the order spreading into the sky, hidden in its stones. With Menai's dispersal into the sky, Selene's nights began once again to be woven around roads, water, and reflection. This time, her gaze turned more often toward the broad bay stretching at the foot of Latmos. In those ages, the still body of water now known as Lake Bafa had not yet been completely separated from the sea, and the salty breath of the Aegean was still reaching inward along the Gulf of Latmos. Before beginning her journey each night, Selene had made a habit of descending over this mass of water, because there she could see not only her own image, but also how her whole story was being hidden together with the mountain and the water. As the white stallions of her chariot glided just above the surface, it suddenly shone like a silver mirror. The darkness was taking the moon's delicate embroidery into itself. When Selene combed her hair or adjusted her diadem, the reflection in the lake was not offering an unchanging beauty. On the contrary, it was rippling together with the sorrow inside her. For the lonely queen of the sky, this mirror was not merely a surface of adornment, it was becoming a silent threshold opening onto the mountain where her lover was hidden, onto her own nights, and onto the patience that was growing heavier with time. The importance of Bafa, or by its old name, the Gulf of Latmos, was not coming only from its beauty. In the story of Selene and Endymion, the water was working like a third memory standing between the sky and the earth. Each time the goddess bent over it, she was seeing the transition between the mountain's hard rocks and her own light more softly in the water. The dark mass of Latmos was breaking and multiplying on the surface of the gulf. The moonlight was dividing over the waves and joining together again. For that reason, for Selene, the gulf was not just a landscape to be watched. It carried within it both the nights descending to her lover's cave, the cycles in which Manai had scattered into the sky, and the reflection of her own patience. Each time she looked at the water, she was feeling that the untouched youth inside the cave was trembling on another surface. Endymion himself might not have been visible there, but the effect of the sleep chosen for his sake was living in every silver shimmer on the water. Thus, the gulf ceased to be a backdrop standing outside the story. Like Latmos, it too turned into an active witness in which the fate of Selene and Endymion was being silently recorded, reflecting back light and longing. Time, meanwhile, was continuing to work not only in the sky but on the earth as well. The alluvium carried by the Buick Menderes was filling the mouth of the gulf over centuries, slowly narrowing the water's open connection with the sea, and in the end, initiating the geographical change that would turn the old Gulf of Latmos into today's Lac Bafa. This transformation was also affecting the historical fate of settlements in the region, such as Heraclea by Latmos. Shores that had once faced the sea were gradually turning into the edge of a more inland, more enclosed and quieter body of water. This change did not remain only as a geological fact. It was functioning as a line of fate that was deepening even more the solitude that protected Selene's lover. As the gulf changed toward a lake, Latmos was becoming more separated from the noise of the outside world. Endymion's cave and the mythic silence around it were turning into a sanctuary protected through being forgotten. Thus, instead of opposing the goddess's love, nature was taking on a form that concealed it. The place that had once been open to the moving breath of the sea was now becoming a stiller, more inward and more secret mirror. Selene was not merely watching this change from afar. She was also feeling the meaning inside it. Because the waters separating from the sea and turning into a lake resembled the fate of her own love. What had begun as an open, moving story in contact with the outside world was, over time, taking on a more enclosed, more inward, and more protected form. The waters of Bafa were no longer shining with the wildness of the Aegean, but with a heavy stillness held all through the night. For Selene, this stillness was becoming a consolation. Now fewer sounds, fewer people, fewer remnants of daytime were reaching the area around the cave. It was as if nature itself was changing even its own surface in order to make the eternal sleep Endymion had chosen more secure. Each night, as the goddess bent over the water, she was seeing in the transformed gulf that her own loneliness had also changed form. Her pain had not lessened, but it was now being carried more clearly, because a wall of meaning was being built around the waiting. Bafa's silver mirror was becoming not just a surface that gave back an image, but the form, written onto the water, of a love that time was sealing rather than eroding. The ancient structures on the shores, the remains of temples and the sacred places associated with Endymion also began to look different in the silence of this water. The stones that had once faced the open sea directly were now leaning over a still surface, as if all the splendor of the past had finally surrendered to calm. Each time she looked, Selene was understanding more clearly that everything made by human hands would one day break, but that some stories would not be erased, even if the shapes of the land and the paths of the water changed. The walls of Heraclea, the distant shadow of the temple of Athena, and the memory of the places accepted as dedicated to Endymion were gaining a different depth in the waters of Bafa. At night, the light of the sky, and by day the silence of history, were coming together in this lake. For this reason, for Selene, Bafa was turning not only into a personal mirror, but into the form of love transformed into geography. While the cave inside the mountain remained hidden, the water below was becoming the surface echo of that hiddenness. One was holding it in the depths, the other was reflecting it above. This silent partnership established between Latmos and Bafa was making that great mythological atmosphere moving toward the final sections of the story even heavier and more lasting. Thus, every night the same scene was repeating with a new meaning. Selene was descending over the water, combing her hair, seeing her own light in the mirror of the lake or the old gulf, and then traveling toward the mountain above, toward the mouth of the cave, toward Endymion's unchanging face. But now this repetition was becoming not an empty cycle, but a ritual filled with meaning. The water of Bafa, the stone of Latmos, and the silver road of the sky were beginning to carry the same story as three separate elements. The water was reflecting, the mountain was hiding, and the moon was sealing them all each night. For Selene, this order was a form of faithfulness established inside loss. Endymion was still sleeping, Menai was continuing its cycles in the sky, and the lake was silently reflecting everything back. And so Bafa's silver mirror was preserving through the endless night not only the goddess's face, but also the fact that silver and earth had joined and then were forced to remain apart without ever being able to break from one another completely. From that point on, the story was no longer only the story of love, but also the story of the permanence that love left behind in stone, in water, and in traces. As centuries followed one another, the stones of Latmos kept guarding the story more faithfully than people did. The soil carried by the Büyük Menderes changed the shores, the sound of the harbors withdrew, the roads were forgotten, forms of worship were renewed. But that great body of the mountain, woven from gneiss and schist, preserved the fate of Selene and Endymion within its own silent order. The patient erosion of wind and water over millions of years did not merely shape the rocks. For eyes that knew how to look at them, it turned the face of the mountain into a memory. That was why Latmos, though it looked from the outside like an ordinary chain of stone, stood within like a living archive carrying the layers of human history, one atop another. Every hollow, every worn surface, every unexpected rock form held the breath of another age. The noise of ancient port cities, the smoke of sacred places, the shepherd's flute, the silence of monks, and that old silver beam left by moonlight in the caves all continued to live without breaking apart within the mountain's unchanging body. In this way, Latmos became not only a piece of geography, but a great collective memory upon which love and faith had been written one over the other. In the oldest layers of this memory stood the red lines left by prehistoric hands. The paintings seen in Caradere and the surrounding caves stood not merely as primitive decoration, but like a record of the first human gaze trying to form a relationship with nature. Dancing figures, ritual unions, depictions of horned sacred beings, and bodies moving together formed the first sentences of the mountain's long memory. Then time moved forward, forms of belief changed, yet the rocks of Latmos accepted the new layers with the same calmness. When Christian monks withdrew into desolate hollows, this time frescoes appeared on the cave ceilings showing saints, the life of Jesus, and sacred suffering. Fresh paints settled right beside the red figures that were thousands of years old. Thus, on a single rock, two different ages, two different languages, and two different forms of worship stood side by side. The spirit of the mountain excluded none of them. It kept both the skyward prayer of the pagan age and the inward-turning repentance of monastic silence with the same heavy dignity. That was why Latmos became not only a place that protected the love of Selene and Endymion, but one of the purest witnesses to humanity's insistence on seeking meaning between earth and sky. The stones of Heraclea, too, did not fall outside this silent memory. The streets that once faced the sea, the high stance of the Temple of Athena, the ceremonies around the sacred places connected to Endymion, and the lively life along the shore kept gathering for ages at the foot of the mountain. Then the fronts of the harbors filled in, the water withdrew, trade changed direction, and people shifted to other centers. But the traces left behind by the structures were being added to the mountain's great story rather than disappearing. Walls that looked like ruins by day regained depth at night in the light of Selene. It was as if the breath of old rituals, old waiting, and a very ancient love moved through the spaces between the stones. That was why those who looked at the region began over time to see not only historical remains here, but a sacred landscape. The earth, the water, and the rock, together with the structures built by human hands, came to be read like a single great biography. And that was exactly where Latmos was different. It did not keep stories one by one, but kept them alive by taking them all into the same body and letting them touch one another. The secret of Selene and Endymion did not vanish for this very reason. Even when it mixed among other beliefs, other centuries, and other languages, it remained without being erased. As time moved on, the mountain's present-day name also gained its own mythic association. The silhouette called Beşparmak did not merely describe the form given to the rocks by wind and erosion. It also gained a new meaning in the popular imagination by being perceived like a giant hand stretching toward the sky. Those sharp and steep lines made it seem as though the mountain itself was reaching upward at night, calling to Selene once again and reminding her of the lover sleeping in its depths. In this way, the modern name turned into a continuation of the ancient legend. As people looked at these rocky heights, they began to think not only of a geographic form, but of a being carrying time on its fingertips. Some curves of the rocks recalled a sleeping body. Some surfaces resembled silver light flowing downward. That vague but stubborn idea called the spirit of the mountain seemed to eternalize Selene and Endymion in the forms of stone. That was why, even though the name Beşparmak was given later, it seemed to fit the mountain's very ancient intention. Name and body, legend and landscape came to confirm one another. Latmos no longer continued to carry the same secret, only in its ancient name, but also in its new one, a place where sky and earth touched each other, yet never fully merged, and were never separated forever either. The hidden traces did not remain only in the rocks, the temples, or the walls of caves. They also continued to live in folk narratives. Shepherds kept telling in their own way why some faces of the mountain looked like a body on nights of the full moon, why waves sometimes rose for no reason on the lakeshore, and why an unexplainable coolness was felt when one approached the caves. Some said this was a sign that the moon goddess still descended onto the mountain, while others believed that the sleeping beauty had still not been disturbed. Even though the form of belief changed, the essence of the feeling remained. There was more on this mountain than what appeared. When the night was very quiet, it was even thought that the wind made a sound like a shepherd's flute as it passed through the rocks. Such stories offered no proof to historians, yet for those who wanted to understand the spirit of the region, they carried another kind of truth. Because every great myth survives not only in written sources, but also in the language of the people living close to the land. The hidden traces in Beşparmak were therefore not only archaeological traces, but emotional and cultural ones as well. They were signs that awakened within everyone who looked there an old loyalty they could not name. Thus, for centuries, the Beşparmak Mountains turned into not just a mass of stone that kept rising, but an eternal monument holding all the layers of history at its fingertips. Within it lived at once Selene's silver path, Endymion's silent youth, Menai's rhythm spreading into the sky, Bafa's water turning into a mirror, and humanity's constantly changing beliefs, one after another. The mountain said nothing openly, but it swallowed nothing completely either. It formed its own language through the silence of stone. That was why everyone who looked at it carefully, whether historian, traveler, or a solitary wanderer of the night, did not see only geology or ruins here. They felt that something was still continuing, that a secret had not yet closed, and this feeling opened onto the final gate of the story, because in the end, all traces led to the same place, to that deep secret which Moonlight sought out and found again with every full moon. When the full moon climbed to the highest place in the sky, Selene once again appeared brighter than ever. The steep lines of Latmos turned white under this intense light, as if covered in snow. The gneiss and schist surfaces seemed to lose their hardness for a moment and soften, and the folds of the mountain seemed to breathe like a living body. When Selene loosened the reins of her silver chariot, the light flowed down from the peaks like a long stream of water, and each finger of Beşparmak gave its own silent greeting to that flow. At that moment, the night became not just a time born out of darkness, but a space in which a divine reunion became visible. For Selene, this was no longer an ordinary return. Every full moon was a sacred ritual that tested the secret between her and her beloved again, and made her understand once more that she had not lost him. The stones, water, and caves below lived through this ritual many times, but each time they fell silent, as if it were the first, because some forms of closeness did not grow old as they were repeated. On the contrary, each time they returned, they deepened themselves a little more. The appearance of Latmos under this light said exactly that. Time had passed, centuries had flowed by, names had changed, but the secret had not yet been broken. When Selene descended into the depth of the cave, she found Endymion once again in his unchanged state. The young prince's face was so fresh that it seemed as though he was about to open the eyes he had closed not last night, but centuries ago. The rusty teeth of time could not touch him, could neither carve lines into his face nor diminish the calm brightness of his youth. He had truly become sleep personified, neither an ordinary dead man nor a human who could awaken. He stood on that unique and irreversible boundary between the two. Every time she came, Selene looked long at his forehead, his hair, and his closed eyes. In that gaze there was not only the passionate burning of the old days, but also a heavy tenderness formed through the centuries. By now she fully knew the price of saving him from time. Endymion remained with her, but he could not return to the world of day. Even so, the goddess did not carry this lack as only a loss, because her beloved's remaining unspoiled showed that their love had turned not into an ordinary memory, but into a living and active secret. Every full moon, this secret became visible again, silently, without display, but with an intensity that could not be denied. Outside the cave, Bafa's silver mirror stood still. Beşparmak's fingers stretched toward the sky, and the Menai continued their places in the cycle of the heavens. Thus, all the elements of the story came together in one great silence. The water reflected what the mountain hid. The mountain protected what was revealed in the moon's light, and the sky established a steady rhythm over all of it. Selene was no longer only a goddess. With each return, she also carried the cosmic order created by her own love. Endymion also did not remain only a sleeping young man. With his unspoiled youth, he became a center taken outside time, the hidden core of the lunar cycles, and the purest figure standing in the deep memory of Latmos. For this reason, the end of the story was not a crude victory over death. It was more the rearranging of the line between death and life in another way. Love overcoming mortality in a different form instead of removing it. The human voice fell silent here, but in its place stone, light, and water continued to speak. And they were witnesses that endured much longer than human words. Even centuries later, those who looked up at the sky tried to understand why the full moon seemed more intense above Beşparmak than in other places. Some considered it only a trick of geography, while others thought of it as an echo left in folk memory by old myths. But when the mountain was looked at carefully, it was felt that explanation alone was not enough, because some places seemed deep not only because they existed, but because of the invisible meaning they carried. Latmos was one of them. There, the moonlight did not only illuminate, it also made the past, sacrifice, the price, and loyalty visible. The small waves rising on Bafa, the coolness at the entrance of the cave, the erosions in the rocks that resembled a human face, and the unexplainable clarity on full moon nights remained, even if they were not proof of a miracle by themselves, like signs circling around the same secret. That is why the secret of the moonlight was never completely solved, because that secret was not a piece of knowledge exhausted when told, but a truth that lived when felt. Selene and Endymion's story was not forgotten for exactly this reason. It deepened to the extent that it could not be explained, and became lasting to the extent that it was kept hidden. It was said that on every full moon night, Selene still leaned over the lake and combed her hair, and that on some nights she even left a single tear in the water. Whether this narrative was a myth or the poeticized memory of the people, at its core, it carried the same thing. Love had not ended here. It had only changed form. Endymion did not awaken, and Selene could not return him to the world of day. but the two did not completely lose each other. The bond between them continued, not in the loud and complete form of reunion, but in the silent and enduring form of loyalty. This was perhaps not the kind of happy ending the human heart expected, but it was a more real, heavier, and longer-lasting closure. Because some loves were made eternal not by being lived together, but by being protected together. In the depths of Latmos, on the surface of Bafa, and in the steady cycle of the sky, exactly such an eternity was established. The secret endured not because it remained unexplained, but because every element accepted keeping it in its own language. The moonlight came, the water held it, the stone hid it, and the night gave birth to it again each time. Thus the story ended not with a great closure, but with a lasting vibration. Selene returned to the sky again, but her returns were no longer empty. Endymion remained silent again, but this silence was not an extinction. Beşparmak remained in its place again, but it was no longer only a mountain. Bafa grew still again, but it was no longer only water. The Menai turned again, but they were no longer only a calendar. As everything continued its own existence, at the same time, it also carried the invisible burden of that old love. This was the secret of the moonlight. Immortality was not keeping the body standing forever, but being able to preserve the beloved outside time, inside the world, and in the depth of memory all at once. In the end, Selene and Endymion's fate also turned into this: neither complete union nor complete separation, neither a completed life nor an ended death. Only a great secret kept together by light, stone, water, and silent loyalty. And each time the full moon rose, Latmos continued to extend this secret toward the sky again, explaining it to no one, but making everyone feel it. Centuries passed. The stones of Latmos wore down, the shores of the gulf changed, the old harbors fell silent, new roads opened. But the story of Selene and Endymion did not disappear inside the mountain. It did not remain only as an ancient legend of love. It turned into a mirror of the deepest relationship human beings form with time. Because at the center of this story, there was not only the forbidden closeness between a goddess and a mortal, there was a harder, more lasting, more human question. What does a person truly want to preserve? Their face, their youth, their memory, or the unspoiled essence hidden beneath all of these? At first glance, Endymion's choice seems like a blessing. Time stops, decay pulls back, beauty is preserved. But within that silent miracle, there is also a heavy loss. Day withdraws, sound withdraws, the warm disorder of living withdraws. What remains is a preserved being, but the price of that being is also written forever on the walls of the cave. That is why the depth of Latmos preserves not only love, but also humanity's oldest contradiction. Perhaps this is also what brings the story so close to today. Because even if the age changes, the unease human beings feel toward time does not change. It only changes its face. Once, a single white strand of hair was enough to fill a goddess's heart with fear. Today, that same fear lives in mirrors, grows in photographs, multiplies on screens. Human beings no longer ask the gods for endless sleep, but they carry the same desire in other languages. They want to fix their face in place, keep their body young, preserve their memories without distortion, remain unforgettable. They record everything, store every moment, multiply every image. They act as if the more something is preserved, the more lasting it will become. Yet sometimes the opposite happens. The image multiplies, the meaning diminishes. The face is preserved, the soul grows tired, the memory remains, but the feeling itself fades. There is an invisible bond between the silence of Endymion's cave and the digital archives of the modern world. In both, human beings want to defeat time. In both, the real issue tightens at the same point. At what cost? The real tragedy of today, however, grows not only in the fear of aging, but in the condition of being unable to rest. Human beings no longer want only to stop time. At the same time, they want never to stop at all. Nights grow longer, screens do not go dark, messages do not end. Work spills from one place into another. Attention is fragmented. The mind grows tired. Sleep stops being a need and is lived as a postponed luxury. Calm is counted as inefficiency. Silence is often confused with emptiness. Human beings remain constantly on, constantly connected, constantly available. That is why the weariness of our age is not only the weariness of the body, but of the soul. If the eyes do not close, the heart does not deepen either. If the mind does not fall silent, the inner voice cannot be heard. Endymion withdrew from the waking world in order to preserve what he loved. Modern human beings, however, often stay awake so long that they can no longer even notice what they love. While trying not to miss anything, they miss their own inner self. While trying to keep up with everything, they arrive late to themselves. And perhaps the greatest loss begins here. While running not to live, but only not to fall behind, a person forgets the rhythm of their own soul. That is why the story of Latmos is not only a tale of love, it is also a matter of rhythm. The phases of the moon, the cycle of Menai, the silence of the cave, the mirror of the lake, the patience of the mountain. All of these speak of an order. That order does not crush human beings, does not rule over them. It only reminds them of this: everything has its own time. There is a time for light, and there is a time for darkness. There is a time for appearing, and there is a time for withdrawing. Both waking and sleeping have a meaning. Yet modern life often erases these distinctions. It turns night into day, covers silence with noise, treats waiting as worthless, presence slowing down as a deficiency. In such a world, people pass by without even living the seasons. Rain becomes only the weather, the moon turns into only an object in the sky, the mountain remains only as a backdrop seen from afar. Yet the story of Selene and Endymion whispers that a person can return to their own depth only when they truly hear the rhythm of the outer world. Without lifting their head to the sky, without looking carefully at the surface of the water, without accepting the meaning carried by the wind, the mountain inside a person also remains silent. There is another truth as well. Endymion's choice was heavy, but it was conscious. He knew what he would lose. He also knew what he was preserving. Modern human beings, however, often do not possess that clarity. They give something in order to be visible, give something in order to speed up, give something in order to accumulate, give something in order to keep up. But what they leave behind, they usually understand only much later. They give their attention, they give their depth, they give their patience, they give their closeness. They give the ability to sit quietly. They give the ability to look at a person's face for a long time. They give the freedom to watch a landscape, without recording it. And while doing all of this, they often take it to be the natural flow of life. Yet the issue tightens precisely here. The flow of life and a person wearing themselves down are not the same thing. Something being fast does not mean it is alive. Something being seen a great deal does not prove that it is truly valuable. This is exactly why the cave of Latmos leaves behind a silent but hard question for today. For the sake of the thing you think you are preserving, what are you actually diminishing? And yet this story does not stop by striking a dark wall. On the contrary, among its heavy sorrow, it carries a very simple consolation. The bond between Selene and Endymion shows us this. Permanence does not always mean freezing. Sometimes permanence is hidden in the rhythm of fidelity. Selene returns every full moon. The lake holds the same light again. The mountain hides the same secret again. Menai establishes the same cycle again. This repetition is not empty. This repetition is the form of love. Repeating the same thing does not make it mechanical. Sometimes, on the contrary, it makes it more meaningful. And perhaps this is where the real way out begins for human beings as well. Not in staying young forever. Not in holding everything at once, but in being able to show regular, honest, careful fidelity to the few things they truly love. In making time for a friend, in quietly opening a window and listening to the night, in looking at a lake and noticing not only the image but also the wave within themselves, in truly resting for one night, in remembering a face without rushing. These may seem like small things, but the soul often finds great salvations inside small fidelities. Perhaps the strongest sentence the secret of Moonlight says to today is this: in the face of time, the real issue is not how long you remain, but what you preserve and how you preserve it. Endymion withdrew from the world of day, but he remained in Selene's gaze, in the mountain's memory, and in the cycle of the night. Modern human beings, however, often think they will become permanent by being visible everywhere. Yet visibility and permanence are not the same thing. What makes a person unforgettable is not how much they are shown, but how deeply they are lived. What makes a love great is not how much it is told, but how long it is carried. What keeps a memory alive is not how many times it is shared, but how many times one quietly returns to it. Latmos did this with stone. Bafa did this with water. Selene did this with light. And perhaps human beings can do this in their own lives with care, fidelity, and measure. The weariness of every age changes, but the subtle wisdom that saves a person often remains the same. A little silence, a little slowing down, a little looking, and a little letting go. That is why the light falling over Beşparmak on full moon nights still seems different. Someone who looks there, whether they know the story or not, feels that they are not looking only at a landscape. It is as if the mountain speaks inward toward the human being. You do not have to live everything quickly, it says. You do not have to collect everything. You do not have to produce every moment, appear every moment, prove every moment. Some things ripen only when they are delayed. Some feelings deepen only when they fall silent. Some truths can be seen only when the eyes have rested. Selene learned this. Endymion chose this at a heavy price. The mountain held this in its stones. The water multiplied this on its surface. And even ages later, in their own sleepless nights, human beings came before the same question: what do I truly want to preserve? My face, my speed, my achievements, or that inner essence that stands deeper than all of these, and that once lost cannot be brought back by anything? The true closing of the epilogue also stands here, because this secret no longer belongs only to Selene and Endymion. It seeps into the life of every reader ready to hear it. There is a Latmos inside every person, the mountain of the things they keep hidden. There is a Bafa inside every person, the silent mirror that shows what they truly see when they look at themselves. There is a little Selene inside every person, the fidelity that does not want to lose. And there is a little Endymion inside every person, the deep desire that wants to be preserved, to stop, to come to rest, to remain without being spoiled. Perhaps a person walks between these four elements throughout their whole life. Sometimes they move toward the light, sometimes they are drawn to the stone, sometimes they look into the water, sometimes they close their eyes, and perhaps true wisdom is born precisely here, not in endless wakefulness, not in keeping up with everything, but in finally being able to understand when to stop, when to let go, when to wait, and what to truly preserve. In the end, the secret of Moonlight tells us this: human beings do not defeat time, but within time they can find a deeper, more honest, and more human answer about how to live.